I was trapped in a backwater world of second-rate fighters, and I came with a copy of the legendary Crimson Blade technique. The entire underground was buzzing about this ultimate combat manual. My wife, Claire, got on her knees, begging me to give the manual to her protege. Caleb's been training for the summit at Obsidian Peak for so long. Please, just let him have it. When I refused, she poisoned me. Don't blame me, my love. Blame yourself for having something everyone wants. I had no choice but to hand over the manual. What she didn't know was that I'd already made 1 million digital copies and released them for free on the guild networks. And they had no idea I'd deleted the final page. The page that contained the 8 most important words. To master the blade, the unbroken can prevail. Claire snatched the data chip containing the Crimson Blade technique from my hand. Then, she casually pulled a small vial from her sleeve and tossed it onto the bedside table. Ethan, that's the antidote. Don't think I'm cruel. Caleb, he really can't afford to lose this opportunity. From the doorway, her protege, Caleb Thorne, leaned in. His handsome young face was a mask of feigned apology. Ethan, don't blame Claire. She did this for me, and for the future of our house. After the old man died, the organization fell apart. I need to be the one to rebuild it. Don't worry, once I win the summit and solidify my position. He paused, a smirk playing on his lips. I'll make sure to save a respectable senior consultant position for you. I'll take care of you. Claire's lips curved into a slight, satisfied smile. She didn't linger, didn't even spare me a second glance before turning to leave. Caleb immediately fell into step behind her. For a moment, their silhouettes overlapped in the moonlight filtering through the door. Then they vanished. A few hushed laughs drifted back from the courtyard before their footsteps faded away. The room fell silent. I grabbed the vial, looked at the antidote, and set it down without taking it. Then, I pulled another data chip from a hidden compartment under the bed. The Helios technique. It had come with me to this world, too. In this backwater fighting circuit, these 2 techniques were like having a royal flush in a game of Go Fish. Strangely, I only had to review the Helios technique once to achieve perfect mastery. The poison? I'd already forced it out of my system with my own bioenergy. The man whose body I now inhabited was a nobody, a complete amateur with 0 training. He'd only married Claire because he'd saved her life during the attack that killed her father. But Claire's heart had always belonged to Caleb. Fine, they could have each other. Claire didn't come home that night. The next morning, I walked into the city's biggest underground data den, Sami's Prince. The proprietor was a wiry old man. I slapped the data chip I'd loaded with the corrupted Crimson Blade technique onto the counter. 1 million copies. And I need it fast. The old man glanced at the chip's label, and his lip twitched. The Crimson Blade? You want me to copy this? I waved a dismissive hand and leaned in closer. It's a knockoff. Just some junk to fool the desperate. We can make a quick buck. The old man froze. Then his eyes widened as the gears started turning. A massive business opportunity was staring him in the face. He lowered his voice, trembling with excitement. The summit is almost here. Everyone in the guilds wants the Crimson Blade. Why didn't I think of this? All right, I'll handle this for you quietly. We keep this between us. As for the split, no problem. You take 80%. I'll take 20. It's a deal, I nodded. The money was irrelevant. I would have done it for free. But it had to be fast. And it had to be everywhere. I left and returned to that cold, empty house. As soon as I stepped into the courtyard, Claire emerged from the main house. Her face was a picture of remorse. She walked up to me, her voice thick with guilt. Ethan, I was too rash last night. I'm so sorry. The truth is, there is no antidote. I looked up at her. Her words came out in a rush, her voice laced with panic. It was Caleb. He was so nervous, afraid you wouldn't give up the manual, that he grabbed the wrong pouch. He took the poison we use on the feral dogs of the compound. That stuff. She bit her lower lip, her eyes turning red. There's no cure. You just have to endure it for a month, and then you die from massive internal bleeding. Ethan, it's all my fault. I already screamed at him for it. She reached out to grab my sleeve, her fingertips trembling with supposed concern. Just then, Caleb's voice, as weak as a dying whisper, drifted in from the doorway. And he clutched the doorframe, slowly shuffling inside. After only one night, his face was as pale as paper, his eyes sunken. Caleb looked at me and managed a weak smile. It was uglier than a grimace, tinged with a strange, chilling coldness. Ethan, the technique is real. I practiced for a bit and could feel the energy flowing, but it seems like you tore off the last page. I shrugged. I was feeling sick from the poison last night, had a runny nose. I used a printout of the last page to wipe it. It wasn't anything important, just some pricing information for the manual. As I spoke, I kept the real last page hidden under my blanket. He paused, his vacant eyes staring straight at me. Don't blame me. Yesterday, I grabbed the wrong poison. It wasn't on purpose. Besides, you'll still make it to the summit. You can watch me dominate the competition. After you're gone, I'll take good care of Claire. I promised her. The day I reach the top is the day I make her my wife. Claire, who was supporting him, blushed. The next morning, Claire stood by my bed, her expression flat. Ethan, for this next month, I'll stay by your side, even though we were never truly husband and wife. I'll be here for you, to bring you tea and water. Consider it me repaying you for saving my life. She paused, took a deep breath, and her gaze shifted towards Obsidian Peak in the distance. Her tone hardened. The summit. You have to be there. We'll leave today. We need to see Caleb reach the top with our own eyes. Watch him make his name. That way you can rest in peace, right? I coughed weakly and gave a slight nod. From outside the door, Caleb spoke, his voice artificially high-pitched. Brothers and sisters, is everyone ready? The vehicles are prepped. Time to move out. His voice carried across the courtyard, loud enough to ensure I heard every word. Let's not let certain baggage slow us down. The competition at the summit is fierce. If we're late, we won't get a good spot. It will be a shame to waste the opportunity our dear Ethan bought with his life. A chorus of snickers erupted from his cronies outside. A useless amateur, not an ounce of training. Why is he even going to the summit? He won't even understand what he's seeing. And we have to carry him? What a drag. Caleb's just too kind-hearted, even bothering to bring him along. Hey, what can you do? He's Caleb's brother-in-law. Let him see the world before he kicks the bucket. It's a privilege. I just hope he doesn't die on the way. The smell would be a hassle. Ha ha. Their mockery was loud and unrestrained. I listened to their venomous words, my face impassive. Inside me, the pure energy of the Helios technique flowed, warm and boundless, an inexhaustible current. Two of them came in to carry me. They handled me roughly, like a piece of cargo, and tossed me into a cramped, dilapidated van with a thin layer of straw on the floor. Along the way, they continued to mock me and praise Caleb for acquiring the Crimson Blade, certain he would dominate the summit. Caleb just smirked. All right, guys, show some decency. Ethan, he may be a burden, but he doesn't have much time left. Let him witness the pinnacle of our world. It's the compassionate thing to do. Another round of laughter and agreement followed. I kept my eyes closed. They all believed Caleb had obtained the ultimate technique, his ticket to the top. But they didn't know that the final page of the manual was gone. The initial progress was indeed rapid, the attack sharp, but the foundation was broken. The deeper one trained, the more horrific the backlash would be. On the day of the summit, when they unleashed their full power, their bioenergy would have to find a way to leak out. A few more days passed. Claire, counting the days, believed my time was running out. The anxiety on her face grew more pronounced. Just then, a drone zipped through the air and dropped a small capsule in her hand. She read the note inside, and her face fell. Scarlet Frost? Her brow furrowed as she glared at Caleb. She nearly killed me back in the day. Why did you give the manual to her? The note was crumpled in her fist, but the elegant handwriting was still visible. Caleb, honey, waiting for you in Suite 3 at the Peak. Got the file. Big thanks. Zoxo, Scarlet. A flicker of panic crossed Caleb's eyes. He snatched the note back, crumpled it into a ball, and stuffed it in his pocket. Claire, don't get the wrong idea. There's nothing going on. The technique I'm practicing requires total abstinence, a clear mind. I gave her father a copy, but it was a heavily redacted version. It's useless to them. She's just a pawn. Seeing the suspicion on Claire's face, he waved his hand in frustration. Can you stop being so paranoid? Stay out of my business from now on. Claire froze on her horse, stiff as a board, her eyes filled with disbelief. It was as if she was seeing him for the first time. After another 10 days, we finally reached Obsidian Peak. The base of the mountain was a sea of people, a shoulder-to-shoulder crowd. Looking around, apart from the women, all the male fighters, old, young, tall, short, fat, thin, had a strange, unsettling air about them. Their faces were universally pale, their eyes either sinister or feverishly bright. Damn, I had to give them credit. Had all 100,000 people on this mountain practiced the corrupted Crimson Blade technique? Interesting. There were a lot of grifters out there. A technique missing a page was probably further butchered and redacted by those who came after. Passed down from one fool to the next, it was likely stripped down to nothing but the first 8 words. To master the blade, one must first. What the hell had these people been practicing? Their foundations were rotten, their bioenergy unstable and volatile. They were like fragile leather bags stuffed with gunpowder. Once the fighting started and they went full power, I couldn't even imagine the scene. This mountain was about to get shot full of holes. Just then, a small commotion rippled through the crowd. A woman in a canary yellow jumpsuit moved like a slippery eel, parting the crowd and making a beeline for Caleb. Caleb, honey. She didn't even glance at Claire, who was standing right next to him. She threw herself into Caleb's arms, her own arms wrapping around his neck like a pair of snakes. Caleb, honey, you finally made it. I've been waiting for you in Suite 3 for ages. She tilted her face up, her eyes smoldering. Her manicured fingers tapped lightly on his chest. My father was ecstatic when he got the manual you sent. He said the championship is as good as his this year. She pressed close to his ear, her voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly. Once Dad wins and solidifies our family's power, he's agreed to let you marry into House Frost. Caleb, darling, from now on. Shut up. A piercing shriek cut her off. Claire looked as if she'd been struck by lightning, her entire body trembling. She stared at the two entangled people, her eyes so red they looked like they were about to bleed. Caleb, you've been seeing her all along, and you're going to marry into her family? Her voice was a hoarse, broken rasp. You lied to me? You've been lying to me this whole time. Caught in a public embrace with Scarlett, Caleb's face flushed with embarrassment, but it was quickly replaced by annoyance. He looked at Claire, his gaze as cold as if he were looking at a piece of trash. Lie to you? Caleb sneered, his voice sharp and cruel. Claire, take a good look at yourself. A married woman, used goods, an idiot. If it wasn't for that manual you were holding, you think I'd waste a second glance on you? I've been playing the part of the devoted lover for so long. If you're not sick of it, I sure as hell am. Claire staggered back a step, the color draining from her face, leaving it a deathly gray. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Scarlett, nestled against Caleb, giggled. The sound was like silver bells, but laced with venom. Oh, Caleb, darling, why are you wasting your breath on this idiot? She shot Claire a contemptuous look, her tone dripping with undisguised malice. Miss Monroe, you really are hopelessly stupid. Did it never once cross your mind how your father actually died? Claire jolted, her vacant eyes snapping into focus, locking onto Scarlett. Scarlett's smile widened, filled with the cruel delight of a cat toying with a mouse. You thought your father died because his training went wrong? TSK, TSK, TSK. So naive. That was our family's Seven Fates toxin. Colorless, odorless, mixed right into the incense he used during his meditation. She savored the sight of Claire's face twisting in horror. As for who administered it, she deliberately drew out the sound, her gaze shifting suggestively toward Caleb. Boom! Claire froze completely. Caleb ignored Claire, instead looking at me with a smirk. My dear brother-in-law, by my count, you should be knocking on death's door by now. How is it that you're not bleeding from every orifice? Can't bear to leave your darling wife. He paused, a series of chilling chuckles escaping his throat. But it won't be long now. Any minute. Regret it yet? Handing over the ultimate technique for a stupid woman who's in love with someone else? What a shame. Your devotion was wasted. It's so pathetic, even a dog would turn its nose up at it. His triumphant expression deepened as he leaned closer, spitting each word with visceral hatred. Open your damn eyes and watch. Watch me. Watch how I walk over your corpse. To the summit of this mountain. Your life, your woman, your manual. They're all just stepping stones for me. Caleb Thorne. Ha ha ha. He glanced dismissively at Claire and added with a cold sneer. Oh, right, I forgot to mention. I grabbed the wrong poison on purpose. I never intended for this waste of space to live in the first place. Claire's body trembled violently. She turned to look at me, her eyes for the first time filled with regret. Just then, not far away, a tall, skinny old man who had been excitedly demonstrating his newfound energy insights to a friend suddenly went rigid. A moment later, an unmistakable, suppressed sound of leaking air escaped him. The old man's face turned beet red, his expression a mask of agony. Caleb frowned, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. But before he could process it, clang! The sound of a massive gong drew everyone's attention to the main tournament stage on the peak. The summit at Obsidian Peak had begun. The real show was about to start. 100,000 powder kegs, and the fuse was lit. It was sizzling. Dong! The second gong, sharper and more urgent than the first, struck everyone's heart like a sledgehammer. The crowd erupted. Charge! The warden's seat is mine. Kill! The sea of heads surged like a boiling anthill, letting out a deafening roar as they swarmed the massive, four-sided central stage. The sounds of battle cries, clashing weapons, and chaotic footsteps merged into a deafening tidal wave of noise. There was no honor, no division between guilds. It was an all-out brawl from the start. The flash of blades exploded in an instant, sending sprays of blood everywhere. Screams of pain were endless. The rule was simple. If you wanted to be the warden, you got on the stage. The last one standing wins. Figures had barely leaped onto the edge of the stage before they were impaled by weapons thrust from all directions, falling with agonized cries. Those behind them scrambled over the bodies and the wounded, their eyes red with bloodlust, continuing the charge. The stage was quickly coated in a thick, viscous layer of blood. Chaos. Brutality. It was utterly, horrifically bloody. A true meat grinder. Caleb stood at the front of the crowd, arms crossed, a cold, confident smirk on his face. Dozens of other masters, their auras darker and their faces even paler, stood with him, watching with cold detachment. They were waiting for the cannon fodder on stage to exhaust themselves, to bleed themselves dry. Then, they would sweep in and clean up what was left. That was the smart way to play it. Caleb! Claire stumbled over to Caleb, her face a mess of conflict. Tell me, what Scarlett just said wasn't true. My father's death. You had nothing to do with it, right? You're going to marry me after you win. You promised me. Get lost. Scarlett shoved Claire away, her eyes spitting venom. You Monroe bitch. Are you deaf? Caleb said it already. You were just a stepping stone. A used-up whore. And you still have the nerve to bother him? Caleb is going to marry me. My family can give him everything he wants. You're lying. Claire's eyes were crimson, like a cornered, rabid animal. She lunged at Scarlett recklessly. It was you. You're the bitch who seduced him. You drove a wedge between us. Caleb would never treat me like this. The two women were instantly at each other's throats, screaming, clawing, their hair flying. They looked less like fighters and more like two feral animals. The other members of their group looked at each other, wanting to intervene, but not daring to. The scene was pure chaos. Enough! A sharp shriek exploded, filled with frustration, agony, and an uncontrollable rage. Caleb's face was ashen, veins bulging on his forehead. The increasingly frequent and clear sound from the stage were like needles stabbing into his ears, driving him insane. The cold, stabbing pain in his lower abdomen seemed to pulse in time with the noises. And now these two women were screaming and tearing at each other right next to him, adding fuel to the fire. He whipped his head around, his eyes shot with blood, wild and animalistic. He roared at the grappling Claire and Scarlett. Marry you. Marry her. Both of you, shut the hell up. I'm practicing the ultimate technique. I have myself cut, neutered. Do you understand? I'm not marrying anyone. Not anyone. All of you women, get the hell away from me. The raw, desperate roar was like a thunderclap. The area around them fell into a dead silence. Claire and Scarlett froze mid-struggle, the rage and hatred on their faces replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock and a dawning, unspeakable horror. Their eyes were wide, fixed on Caleb's face, which was contorted by rage and despair. Cut. Neutered. The expressions on the faces of his followers were a spectacular mix of shock, dawning realization, absurdity, and even a faint, hidden trace of fear and relief. No wonder his complexion had become so delicate, his walk so light recently. After his outburst, Caleb himself seemed to stun himself into silence. Then came a wave of overwhelming shame and fury. This was a secret he was supposed to take to his grave. He'd been pushed by those damned leaking sounds from stage and by these two stupid women. He spun around, his venomous eyes locking onto me like a viper's fangs. You! His voice was a high-pitched, disbelieving shriek of pure rage. Ethan Vance, you goddamn nobody. Why aren't you dead yet? Why aren't you bleeding from your eyes and ears? What about the poison? It's been a month. How the hell are you still alive? My face remained impassive. I looked at him, spread my hands, and the corner of my mouth twitched into a minuscule smirk. My voice wasn't loud, just tinged with a bit of confusion. The poison? Oh, that. I blinked, as if trying hard to remember. Maybe. I had my shots as a kid, built up some antibodies. So, I fought off. My voice carried clearly to the few people around us. Shots? Antibodies? No one understood the strange words. But everyone understood the meaning. The poison hadn't worked. This amateur, Ethan Vance, wasn't dead. He was perfectly fine. Caleb's face went from ashen to purple, then back to a ghastly white. He asked suspiciously, how was that possible? That was a genuine, incurable toxin. I saw it tested myself. How could you? Antibodies? What the hell are those? PFFT, PFFT, PFFT. Just then, the sound from the stage grew terrifyingly frequent. It was no longer a few scattered leaks. It was like a horrific switch had been flipped. Chaos. The stage had descended into utter chaos. As more and more fighters who had practiced the ultimate technique pushed their bioenergy to the limit, their volatile, unstable, and fundamentally broken core energy could no longer be contained. PFFT, PFFT, PFFT. The leaking sounds were everywhere, rising and falling, growing louder and more constant, accompanied by agonized, terrified screams. Arg, what's happening? Stop. My energy. It's leaking. It's all leaking out. No. Arg. It hurts. My core. It's rupturing. Help. Me. The intense battle instantly transformed into a living hell. Countless fighters, as if seized by an invisible hand, doubled over and writhed on the ground, letting out inhuman wails. Their faces were twisted in agony and humiliation, slick with tears and snot. The stage was a chaotic mess of screams, leaking sounds, flying flecks of blood, and writhing bodies. Ha ha ha! A bunch of weaklings! A shirtless brute roared with laughter. The massive blade in his hand whistled through the air as he cut down several screaming opponents around him. He had a few cuts on him, bloody and raw, but his momentum was unstoppable. He pointed his blade at a few surviving opponents who were struggling to stand, their faces pale, and sneered, "Come on, what I practice is the genuine Crimson Blade technique. The ultimate power. Who's next?" Next to him, a wiry man wielding a pair of stilettos, his movements swift and unervingly fluid, had just taken down an opponent. He heard the brute's boast and retorted in a shrill voice. "Bullshit. You called it the Crimson Blade? I paid 10 grand in crypto to fingers Jean for mine. This is the real deal. Take this." The wiry man's stilettos danced through the air, stabbing insidiously toward the brute's ribs. The brute swung his blade to block. With a loud clang, they both took a step back. The brute's eyes bulged. 10 grand? I paid 20. Took it off a senior member of the Empty Hand Syndicate. Yours is definitely a fake. Not far away, a short man, legs clamped together as he awkwardly dodged a stray sword stroke, shrieked, "I paid 30 grand. Had to pull strings with the river dogs to get it. You all bought knockoffs. 50 grand. 80. The bids echoed across the chaotic stage, filled with a bizarre, competitive fervor. The fighting seemed to slow down as the few dozen men still on their feet, all grimacing in pain as they tried to control the rampaging energy in their bodies, argued with bloodshot eyes over who had spent more money, whose manual was more authentic. Every single one of them was convinced they had the real thing, and everyone else was a fraud. Amidst this surreal argument, a middle-aged man in a silk robe, his face as white as a sheet, suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood and burst into maniacal laughter. His voice was sharp and piercing. "Ha ha! Fools! A bunch of fools! Your chump change is nothing. I spent $1 million in gold-backed crypto for a first-generation direct copy. This is the real one. The genuine. Crimson Blade. Technique." He spread his arms as if to embrace victory, his face a mask of twisted triumph. The entire arena fell silent for a heartbeat. Everyone stared at him with a complex mix of shock, jealousy, greed, and a sliver of dawning, hopeless despair. But CHH, an unprecedentedly loud, deep, and final leaking sound exploded like a leather bag being instantly ripped open. And then, PFFT, PFFT, PFFT. It was the final trigger. On the stage, every man still arguing, still struggling to stand, convulsed violently at the same time, as if they had all been simultaneously run through with an invisible blade. Jets of blood mixed with uncontrolled, foul bioenergy erupted from their bodies. The screams reached a final, piercing crescendo and were then abruptly cut off, as if their throats had been slit. Countless figures, like wheat before a scythe, crumpled to the ground in the viscous pools of blood and filth. The massive stage was suddenly empty, save for the hundreds of bodies twitching in their final moments. Silence. Even the wind seemed to have died. Down below, Caleb's face was terrifyingly pale, but his eyes were burning with a frightening intensity. Swoosh! His body blurred into a cold, gray shadow, the first to leap onto the silent stage. The tips of his shoes landed on the edge of a pool of blood, carefully avoiding the filth. He stood firm, forcing himself to straighten his back and maintain the air of a master, even as his insides churned. "Caleb," a voice called out. Scarlett's father, Marcus Frost, followed close behind, vaulting onto the stage. His face was just as pale, his eyes just as sinister, but his steps were steady. He landed opposite Caleb, his complex gaze sweeping over the carnage before finally settling on Caleb, filled with scrutiny and a barely perceptible greed. "My boy," Marcus began, his voice low but carrying with the force of his training, audible only to the two of them on the stage. "A wise man knows when to fold. You have talent, but you're young. This warden seat, you can't hold it." He paused, dangling a temptation. "Concede. I, Marcus Frost, am a man of my word. The victory will be mine, but the Frost Empire and Scarlet, they'll all be yours. Marry into my house, and I guarantee you a life of wealth and power. No one will ever dare cross you." Caleb looked at Marcus, and his lips slowly stretched into a wide, intensely triumphant grin. He lowered his own voice, filled with a long-suppressed glee. "Old man, in your dreams." Marcus's face darkened. Caleb's smile grew more predatory. "You think what I gave you is the real thing? Fool. The copy I gave you was a redacted version of a redacted version. It's barely better than the junk being sold on the street. Your foundation is completely rotten, and you think you can beat me? Ha ha ha. Dream on. The real manual is in my hands. Only I, Caleb Thorne, will be the final victor. The warden's seat is mine. No one can take it from me." Marcus's pupils contracted in a mixture of shock and fury. "You little bastard. You're asking to die." Shedding all pretense, Marcus let out a shrill cry. His wiry hand instantly turned pitch black, whipping through the air with a foul wind aimed straight at Caleb's face. It was his signature move, the Black Vulture Strike. Caleb was ready. A vicious glint flashed in his eyes. Right on time. With a flick of his wrist, the long sword in his hand erupted in a blinding flash of cold light. The blade shadow, sinister, strange, and deceptively fast, struck like a viper, aiming precisely for the center of Marcus's palm. It was the killing blow from the Crimson Blade technique. Clang! Puffed! Sword met palm with the sound of metal on metal, mixed with a bizarre leaking sound. Both men's bodies shuddered. Caleb's expression changed instantly. A tearing pain and a sense of losing control exploded from his core. A thin stream of air escaped him, completely beyond his control. It was faint, but on the deathly silent stage, it was unmistakable. Across from him, Marcus Frost was no better off. He had barely unleashed half the power of his strike when his core felt like it had been stabbed with a needle. Excruciating pain and the draining weakness of his energy leaking away washed over him. The force of his palm strike dissipated instantly, and he staggered. They both saw the answer in each other's eyes. They had both been tricked. The techniques they had practiced were dead ends. But now they were in too deep. Thousands of eyes were watching from below. The title of Warden of the Summit, the throne of the underground world, was within their grasp. Whoever backed down now would be ruined, disgraced, and utterly destroyed. "Old dog." Caleb's eyes were crimson. Forcibly suppressing the pain and fear, he poured all of his remaining energy into his sword and lunged again. The blade was faster than before, but it had lost its sharpness, replaced by an unstable, almost panicked energy. "Little mutt, I'll finish you." Marcus was also all in. Gritting his teeth, he mustered a final burst of energy and threw another Black Vulture Strike. The attack still carried its foul wind, but it was far weaker than before, almost seeming to float. The two men clashed again, but the scene had completely changed. The sharp, powerful aura of masters in combat was gone. Every exchange of blows, every dodge and parry, was accompanied by their bodies' uncontrollable tremors and pain grunts. Most importantly, CHHH. A constant, fine leaking sound like a background track accompanied every exertion of force, every breath they took. The sounds weren't loud, but they were like a dull knife slowly sawing away at their will, draining their strength, and trampling their last shreds of dignity. They fought slower and slower. Their sword strikes became sloppy, their palm strikes weaker. Their faces went from white to a deathly gray, and fat beads of cold sweat mixed with blood rolled down their faces. Every attack seemed to drain the last dregs of their life force. Finally, thump, thump. Almost simultaneously, both men exhausted the last bit of energy they had forced out of their bodies, along with the last bit of strength keeping them upright. On the stage, it was finally quiet. All that was left were two men, collapsed in the filth, waiting to die, and a sickening, foul stench that now blanketed the entire mountain. Below, there was dead silence. Everyone was stunned into a state of shock by the bizarre scene. In the muck, Caleb twitched like a fish out of water. A rattling sound came from his throat as he rolled his eyes, struggling to focus on me. "Ethan, Vance." His voice was destroyed, a raw, grating sound that dragged a bloody froth with every word. That page you tore out. What the hell was on it? The entire mountain seemed to be frozen in time. The wind died, the birds went silent, and even the groans of the men clutching their groins faded. Over 100,000 pairs of eyes, red with rage, wide with shock, glazed with confusion, were nailed to me. I took a slow step, then another, walking onto the stage. I leisurely reached into my jacket, rummaged around, and finally pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "Here," I said, shaking it open, my voice perfectly level. "Looking for this?" On the paper, 8 crooked, hastily scrawled words stood out against the blood-smeared stage, as glaring as a cosmic joke. "To master the blade, the unbroken can prevail." Boom! The entire mountain exploded as if it had been dropped into a vat of boiling oil. The silence shattered. What? The unbroken can't prevail. No wonder we're leaking. Then, what about us? Son of a bitch. A wave of shock, rage, and hysterical madness erupted, the sound nearly powerful enough to shear the top off the mountain. The unrest spread like a plague. Furious glares, sharp as knives, began to converge on me, intent on tearing me apart. Just then, a thin, reedy voice pierced through the chaotic roar. "Mr. Vance! Mr. Vance! Over here!" The wiry proprietor of Sammy's.Prince, looking like a sleek rat, his eyes gleaming, shoved his way to the front of the stage. He rubbed his hands together, tilting his wrinkled face up at me, grinning so wide it looked like his face would split. He pitched his voice high, making sure everyone could hear. Hey, we're rich. We hit the jackpot, Mr. Vance. 1,000,000 copies. And guess what? They were all snatched up in a flash. The price went through the roof. 10 grand, 20, 50. The most expensive one sold for 200,000 in untraceable crypto. He was so excited he was spraying spit, waving his arms around. I've never seen so much money in my life. My hands cramped from counting it all. We stick to our deal, 80-20, your favor, We made a killing. An absolute killing, Mr. Vance. I figured I could sell even more if I broke it up, sold a few pages at a time for more profit, and they started an auction. The highest bidder won. We really cleaned up this time. Boom! The proprietor's announcement was like pouring ice water into the boiling oil. Obsidian Peak went completely insane. It was him. He's the one who printed the fakes. Kill him. Tear him limb from limb. My money. A tidal wave of murderous intent and madness instantly coalesced. Countless eyes, burning with a desire to swallow me whole, shot toward me like physical arrows. I gave a helpless shrug and said with a smile, "Looks like there's no one left. So, that means..." I paused, pretending to be stunned by the conclusion, my eyes widening as I pointed to my own nose. "Then I'm the warden now?" Oofed. Someone in the crowd literally coughed up blood from pure rage. "Like hell you are. In your dreams, you bastard. Get down here. I'll rip you to shreds." The curses washed over me like a tsunami. At the same time, the crowd below the stage erupted. The men who hadn't practiced the Crimson Blade, along with an even greater number of women who had been simmering with resentment and fear, became a raging torrent. "Ward my ass. You scheming snake. Sisters, let's take this despicable bastard down. Get him. 1,000 cuts. Avenge our fallen brothers. Give me back my husband's life." The tide of fury broke its dam. Hundreds of figures, like arrows released from a bow, charged the stage from all sides, fueled by deep-seated hatred and a desire to take me down with them. The light of their blades reflected on their twisted, snarling faces. Leading the charge was, of course, Scarlet Frost. Her eyes were blood red, and a poisoned dagger in her hand glinted with a cold, blue light as she lunged for my throat like a viper. Close behind her were several burly men who hadn't practiced the technique. Their eyes were savage, and the steel blades in their hands whistled through the air, aimed at my head and torso. Further back, Claire's former comrades were mixed in the crowd, their eyes full of contempt and killing intent. The stage had become an isolated island, about to be torn apart. I stood my ground, not even bothering to lift an eyelid. I watched Scarlet's face, contorted with rage. I watched her poison dagger close to within 3 feet of my throat. I watched the vicious arcs of the men's blades, the wind from them already rustling my hair. I even had time to let out a soft sigh, as if annoyed by the noise. Then, I casually lifted my right hand, fingers spread naturally. Boom! A vast, overwhelming power, pure and incandescent, erupted like a volcano that had slumbered for 10,000 years. There was no deafening sound, only a crushing weight, a force that could pulverize anything in its path. Pure golden light so dense it looked like molten gold spewed from my palm. It was searing, tyrannical, radiating an imperial authority that annihilated everything. The air solidified. Time seemed to pause. Scarlet, at the head of the charge, saw her rage instantly replaced by absolute terror and disbelief. She couldn't even scream. Her entire body was slammed by an immense, invisible wave, like a single dry leaf caught in a tsunami. Thump! A sickening, meaty impact. Scarlet's body folded inward at a bizarre angle. The poisoned dagger flew from her hand with a clatter. Her expression froze, becoming a blank slate of shock. Then, like a broken doll struck by a battering ram, she was flung backward without an ounce of resistance, flying 10 times faster than she had charged. The torrent of golden energy didn't stop. Like a river bursting its banks, it smashed into the charging horde behind her. Thump, 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 thump. A rapid-fire series of sickening, bone-jarring impacts. The hundreds of people charging, men and women alike, whatever weapons they held, whatever expressions they wore, shock, savagery, fury, fear, were all frozen solid the moment they touched the golden tide. Then, like straw scattered by a hurricane, they were all violently hurled backward, smashing into the crowd further down and clearing a huge swath of space. Scarlet lay in the distance, a broken heap, her face a mask of utter despair. The entire mountain fell silent once more. A silence deeper, heavier, and more suffocating than before. I slowly lower my hand, my sleeve falling back into place, as if nothing had happened. My gaze swept over the sea of faces below, each one a mask of horror, as if they had just seen a demon god. Anyone else? Caleb stared at me, his body trembling. You. He coughed with every word, the sound tearing at his vocal cords, mixed with a dying gurgle. What technique is that? The mountain was terrified. Nothing had happened. My gaze swept over the sea of faces below, each one a mask of horror, as if they had just seen a demon god. Anyone else? Caleb stared at me, his body trembling. You. He coughed with every word, the sound tearing at his vocal cords, mixed with a dying gurgle. What technique is that? The mountain was terrifyingly quiet. Hundreds of thousands of eyes were fixed on me, filled with the raw fear of survivors. Even the thick, foul stench in the air seemed to have frozen solid. I slowly reached into my jacket again, feeling around. Russell. I pulled out a thick stack of data chips and manuals, shaking them casually. The covers were all different, some of them tattered and worn. This one, I glanced down, flipping through them, and pulled out a manual with the Helios technique scrawled crookedly on the cover. I tossed it in my hand. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, I pulled out the entire stack and showed it to Caleb, my tone flat. The Helios technique. Oh, and I've also got the 9 Shadows step, the adamantine fist, and the dragon's gaze. The crimson blade? I use that to prop up a wobbly table. I smiled. Want to learn? I can give you one. You're already cut, so it doesn't matter what you practice now, right? Cough. Caleb's body arched violently, like a shrimp being crushed underfoot, and he started vomiting blood. He stared at the stack of manuals in my hand, a collection that represented another world, another level of power, as if seeing a mirage he had chased his entire life but could never touch. Cut. All for nothing. A fake. It was all fake. He mumbled incoherently. His voice grew fainter, more broken. His violent convulsions suddenly stopped, and his body went limp. His eyes, once full of ambition and cunning, stared blankly at the gray sky, completely devoid of life. Caleb. A shriek, so shrill it was barely human, tore through the silence. Claire, looking completely unhinged, scrambled onto the stage. Her hair was a mess, her face streaked with tears, snot, and dirt. She cradled Caleb's body for a long moment, then she came to me. She dropped to her knees with a heavy thud, her hands clutching my legs so tightly her nails dug into my skin. Ethan, I was wrong. I was so wrong. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, her voice a ragged mess, filled with the desperation of a drowning person clinging to a piece of driftwood. He tricked me. He killed my father. He stole the manual. He poisoned me. I'm a victim too, Ethan. For the sake of the marriage we had. Forgive me. Please, I'm begging you, forgive me. I'll do anything you say from now on. I'll be your slave. I looked down at her and chuckled. Marriage? A married woman who helped her lover poison her husband now kneels here, asking for forgiveness. I paused, looking down at her face, which had gone white as a sheet. I spoke each word, clear and sharp. Are you even worthy? The plea on Claire's face froze, like a crumpled paper mask. Her expression shifted from pleading to confusion, and from confusion, It ignited into a blaze of pure madness. But that fire wasn't aimed at me. It whipped toward the other side of the stage, where Scarlet Frost was struggling to her feet, her body smeared with blood, her eyes venomously fixed on us. You. It was all you, you bitch. Claire let out a low, animalistic growl from her throat. She released my leg and launched herself like a bloody arrow, flying at Scarlet with a suicidal fury. You seduced him. You killed my father. You ruined my life. I'll kill you. Scarlet's eyes widened in terror. She tried to dodge, but her injuries slowed her down. Schlick. A sickening sound of metal sinking into flesh. Claire had somehow found a broken sword tip on the ground, and, with all her remaining strength, plunged it deep into Scarlet's stomach. Arg! Scarlet let out an inhuman scream. The agony triggered a final burst of strength, and her hands shot out, clamping around Claire's neck. Her sharp nails instantly broke the skin. Bitch! D! Scarlet's eyes were crimson with hatred and pain as she squeezed with the last of her strength. GHK! GHK! The frantic struggle lasted only a few seconds. Scarlet's hands suddenly went limp on Claire's neck. Her body twitched violently a few times, her head lolled to the side, and she went still. Only her eyes remained wide open, staring, full of resentment and defiance. A gurgling, leaking sound came from Claire's throat. She pushed Scarlet's body off her and tried to stumble to her feet. Her gaze swept blankly over Caleb's corpse, then over me, finally settling on nothing. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but all that came out was a thick torrent of dark red, frothy blood. Thump. She collapsed, too, right next to Scarlet. Her body gave a few slight twitches, then was completely still. The stage was finally clean. A dead silence enveloped Obsidian Peak. Hundreds of thousands of people were as quiet as mice. The few hundred who had been blasted off the stage were still groaning in the distance, a faint background noise reminding everyone of what had just happened. As far as the eye could see, the crowd was like a field of wheat flattened by the wind. Thump, thump, thump. It started with those closest to the stage, then spread outward, a wave of motion pushed by an invisible giant hand. Men and women, no matter how defiant they had been moments before, were now overcome with the primal fear of survival. They fell to their knees. Knees hit the cold, hard ground with a series of dull thuds. A sea of black-haired heads bowed low. In the oppressive silence, only the sound of heavy, suppressed breathing remained. I stood on the high stage, a world of prostrated bodies at my feet. In my jacket, I held the keys that could overturn this entire backwater world. The warden? This was just the beginning. I weighed the stack of manuals in my hands, looked down at the endless sea of kneeling figures, and a silent smile touched my lips. Being the warden wasn't bad at all.